Are you caught up in details, and when your painting is done, it looks too stiff and frankly does not look like a painting anymore? Art with wild and loose brushstrokes is also just more fun to make, and I want you to experience that, so that's why I made this video. I'm also going to show you how I apply this information in practice, not just one painting but two completely different looking paintings. This is a framework that you can apply to absolutely everything, and I use this for all of my paintings, and there's no reason why you couldn't benefit from this same system as well. I want to be clear that this is a painting tutorial. You will be able to create all of these textures on your own. You don't need to download any process or textures. I'm not going to suggest photo bashing together some already existing paintings. You will be able to do these techniques from scratch with just one brush. And even though I'm using my own brush in both of these paintings, that is not at all a requirement for this tutorial. You will be able to use these techniques with any brushes already in your library. So this is not a video to sell you brushes. This is a video to sell you painting technique for free. That's all. I want to get the obvious out of the way so we can get to the more interesting stuff quickly. Now, despite being a short king, I have to say that size actually matters. I always start with the biggest possible brush size to block in my main idea. And sometimes I use it just to make a mess, but we'll get to that later in this video. If you're struggling to get your paintings looking more energetic, this will basically force those loose paint strokes in there. The big challenge now is just not looking at them like they're a mistake and fixing them when they don't need fixing. And there's a simple way that you can achieve this. I recommend using only one brush for the entire painting to get the biggest benefit from this whole video. That's how you are able to be in complete control of direction, texture, and the look of your brushstrokes. Here, I'm using my blueberry brush from Brushes for Painters set, but honestly, you can do this with any brush that is designed to paint an entire piece and not just some small segment. I promise you can still use this information later if you revert to using tons of different brushes, but for learning brushstrokes, you need to see them first. So one brush, high opacity, maximum sharpness, and that way you'll learn this in no time. I always feel guilty when I advise limitations in my videos, but all of these are for the purpose of improving your art. I wouldn't make this video if I didn't think it was actually helpful, so please don't hate me for this, even if using that one big brush might feel tricky at first. The longer you spend on a painting, the smaller your brushes usually get. But be aware that you do not have to have those small brushstrokes everywhere. Even when you want to add small details, add them only to your focal point. The benefit of using big brushes is brush economy. This comes from the theory that your painting should look like it has been made with the fewest brushstrokes possible. Now, whether this look is actually something that you want to achieve is obviously subjective, but this is a great way to train bold, loose brushstrokes. You can practice this by setting up a limit for your brushstrokes. 50 or 30 are good numbers to aim for a single subject. For example, a coffee cup on your table might be a single subject that you just attempt to do in 30 or 50 brushstrokes. This shouldn't take that long, so I think this is a great practice to do, for example, before starting a bigger painting. By the way, if you're using Procreate, you can always check the number of brushstrokes you have been using from here. The limited brushstroke exercise is valuable not because it promotes high brushstroke economy, even though it does that as well, but because it dispels the misconception that painting in a free, loose way requires a mentally relaxed state and somehow less care. Every brushstroke matters. Before even thinking about where to put that brushstroke, be deliberate about the color's value and hue. I would go as far as saying that the hue and value of the color that you are choosing matters even more than how you are painting that brushstroke. If it's just the right value and hue, people will be able to bridge that gap of detail in their mind and see what you are intending to say. Now, if you are paying attention, you might have seen this number and thought, Mikko, what the actual fuck? This is not a small number. And to that, I have to say, brushstroke economy is clearly not a priority for my specific aesthetic. And that's why I also wanted to make this video, because all of these videos basically talk about brushstroke economy and not what you actually do with those brushstrokes or where to place them. So that's what the rest of this video is going to be. Now let's level up. Have you ever seen someone sketch and thought it was much better than the cleaned up version? We are great at filling in details on our own if the color and mood are right. This is what makes the connection between the painting and the viewer much more powerful. They see what they want to see. Paint strokes can contain a lot of information as well. They can convey movement, energy, materials, and volume, so don't try to hide them from your art. They can be an asset in creating your piece. But not all brushstrokes are helpful. A brushstroke can quickly go from an energetic part of art into an annoying mark that adds visual noise. I mean, see how annoying this is? I'm sorry, by the way. That's not helping anything. So there is a right place and time for brushstrokes, but that's not everywhere, and we need tools to identify where to put those brushstrokes. So now I'm gonna go over my process and explain how I identify those places. I often seek ideas by making a big mess of colors and brushstrokes. In the beginning, everything is just noise. I know this part might seem magical because nobody else sees what I see when I start to make the actual painting. But it's the same thing when looking at clouds and seeing shapes in there if you look hard enough. I always say that nobody fails at an ink blot test, so I know that you can do this. I just want you to know that when I'm making this mess, I'm not making a painting. I'm just creating that noise to search for ideas. So don't think that there's some sort of a master plan from the first brushstroke. I think that is giving me the kind of credit that I absolutely do not deserve. I'm just driving the car at full speed. I don't have a driver's license and I don't even have my hands on the wheel. That's basically what's happening. I will figure out where I'm going to go later in the process. When I actually see a shape that I like or an idea in all of this mess, I first give shape to my main subject, and the next part is the important one. 3 components. I now have a rough idea, but there are also many messy areas that distract from it. I repaint those areas, the distracting ones. They always fall into only one of 3 possible categories. Any element that is not a focal point is either a stage for the focal point or a road that leads to the focal point. So there are only 3 categories of areas: roads that lead to focal point, the stage for the focal point, and the focal point itself. When working with art students in concept art classes, I've noticed they're often incredible at depicting their main subjects, but they don't have a proper stage for them. And then when they start building that stage, they put in the same sort of like intensity into the stage as the main subject. And then the stage is not a stage anymore. What I'm trying to say is that the stage should highlight the main attraction in your painting, not pull attention away from it. In this painting, it's pretty clear to see how these lines are going to be the highways leading to my focal point, and the areas surrounding the building, they are going to be the stage. It doesn't have to be more complicated than this. As you can see, the stage doesn't have to be empty, and this is what we will use later to have fun with those brushstrokes. I'm also constantly going through my checklist method, and that helps me identify and fix areas that are not working. If you want to learn more about that, I recommend checking out my full art course on Gumroad, where I teach the checklist method I use for every one of these paintings on this channel. Does it read? Subject and the way it's depicted sets a certain bar we need to clear before we can start having fun with our brushstrokes. Basically, can anyone else read this? Also, as a tip to new painters out there, try not to say too many things with just one painting. You can always make more. A powerful message is one where every other part is supporting the tone and the main point of your art. art is a game where nuance matters, and that's why it's so important to find a way to express yourself, even with brushstrokes you make. Everything has already been done, but everything hasn't been done by you, so don't worry about originality, just be you. And being yourself is not easy, that is hard enough, and that takes time and effort, so just focus on that. For this subject to read, I need you to understand that this is a koi fish and that it also has 3-dimensional volume. That's all. That's my whole point. The message is going to be in the way that I show that subject. To get my basics right, I created this frame I've been following all this time to make sure my brushstrokes are painted not just on the surface of this canvas, but on the 3D planes of this frame. For the Greek lighthouse landscape, everything else is optional, but the building needs to look like a building. So placing the hardest edges there will make it stand out from the surrounding nature. I even used selection tools here to make sure that those lines are extra crisp. This way, it will contrast with its surroundings, not just because of the color, but because of the way it's been painted. Once our subjects are understandable, we can start putting down those crazy brushstrokes. But not just everywhere. Expressive brushstrokes look the best in very specific areas where we can play with colors much more freely. Now let's break down where these areas of play are and how do we find them in any painting. This head is closest to the camera, so here I'm extra careful with the details like eyes and the silhouette of the head. But once I get into this transition between scales and the head, I realized this could almost be anything as long as I stick to the color and value logic established elsewhere in the painting. This is an area of play. It doesn't compromise the read of the subject, nor does it steal attention from it. On the scales, I also try to establish a pattern of scales, but in the transition between light and dark, I noticed that I can still put pretty much any color and squiggly paint strokes in, as long as I stick to the same value range. Both of these areas are very active and cost a lot of attention currency. They also bring the texture of this area closer to the camera, as if we were focusing our eyes here. In this painting, we can see the distance effect much more clearly, as the same pattern is repeated throughout this foreground area. These patterns can get way more contrasty and wild as we get closer to the camera. In both of these cases, the hard part is deciding what kind of brushstroke pattern can depict that surface. But once you find a shape language that works in your painting, you can just have fun with the whole surface. And this is really the part where you can let loose and even go on autopilot. You don't hear me saying that too often on this channel. All of the hard decisions are already made, so now you just get to enjoy the painting process and even push the limits of how far you can take these patterns so that they still look like they are part of this group. The distant area here is not introducing any new elements, so even these brushstrokes read as part of the same meadow, even though they are way more simplified than the brushstrokes in the foreground. That's why the tail on the right side of this painting is not an area of play for brushstrokes. Here, their purpose is just to describe the shape and maintain that read of the image. Here on the lower right part of this painting, there's also an opportunity of play in smaller scale, since these brushstrokes don't have as much value or hue contrast, but they can have this dance of swirls because they're not trying to take attention away from the fish, they're highlighting the forward motion of this creature. So even though these are playful, active brushstrokes, I'd still put these in the category of brushstrokes that highlight the focal point. The brushstrokes on the left are also in the background. In this instance, they are contrasting with the whole silhouette shape of the head, because the head of this fish is already being used as an area of play for the brushstrokes, especially in that area where the red color changes. The whole purpose of the background over here is to just give room for it. Another trick that is a bit more advanced is defining shapes only in light. Notice how the entire shape of this cliff is defined only by the brushstrokes that depict the sunlight from the left and the reflected skylight from above. These shadows are a complete mess of dark tones, so the entire area is just held together and contained by those brushstrokes that depict light. One way that you can use this in your workflow and become a more efficient painter is by doing those base shadows first and highlights on top of those. And before going in with more definition, take a step back and ask yourself if you even need more polish in those areas. We often work on areas just out of habit, but by basing our workflow on this logic, you can prevent yourself from overworking on irrelevant details, or even worse, ruining the whole energy of a painting by over-explaining things. Remember, your viewers can bridge the information gap if you are giving them context clues through the way that you depict your focal point and depict the mood in the rest of your painting. Notice that even though I'm talking about brushstrokes here, the same is true for colors. Every area where you go crazy expressive with the colors can be paired with a muted low contrast area. In my water reflection tutorial, I talked about checkerboarding. This is basically the same principle, but with color. Just try to think of areas of play like a party of brushstrokes in your painting, and to make that party as fun as possible, try giving it a proper venue for that party to happen. Different ways to paint. A painting can have bold brushstrokes, not just by having as few as possible. You can have expressive brushstrokes with small brushes too. There are many ways to be loose with your painting style. You can, for example, ignore all arc shapes in your paintings. A big flat edge brush could be great for that. Inventing patterns with your brushstrokes is another way to be expressive. This is something that I love, and I've already made a whole tutorial here on how to use those in a composition. Brushstrokes can also be used to define the volumes of your surface. Here, the volume is highlighted by straight brushstrokes painted on these boxy surfaces. When you have a surface you want to make more interesting, I can also recommend using simultaneous contrast by using different hues with the same value as the main surface. This is super fun, and I highly recommend this to absolutely everyone. I don't know why, but whenever possible, I try to hide these completely out of place colors right in plain sight, and I feel like I've gotten away with something when the painting is done. Hey, you gotta find your fun wherever you can in the process, and this is something that I recommend you try just because I enjoy it so much. When tinkering with this sort of like play of colors in a smaller scale, I cannot underline enough how important it is to zoom out so that whatever craziness that you are doing is not risking the read of your image. So that's why some paintings can look like a complete abstract mess close up, but then when you zoom out, it looks like an actual image. That's why the value and hue choices are so important, and zooming out so that you can see what you are doing. Whatever you do, I recommend trying one approach in one painting. Be kind in the way you paint. If you include all of those methods into one painting, it's really difficult for your viewers to see what you're trying to say if it's just too hard for them to grasp and read what you are telling them. If you focus on just two things, one, what elements do I need to paint clearly for my audience to understand what I'm saying? And two, what way of painting? Simplification, patterns, expressive colors, and so on. Which of those methods would go hand in hand with this message? This is a painting I did on my phone in Procreate Pocket, and sure, I could do a more realistic bird like this, but honestly, I think the whole fun part about this painting is that the brush strokes look just as clueless as this bird. And I wanted to show this as an example of where the style of painting matches with the message. So don't take yourself too seriously. I mean, art is serious, but it's not serious, if you know what I mean. In the live lesson where I was painting this piece, I was asked if the brushstrokes can be big or small, then what does it even mean to paint loosely or more expressively in a painting? And I think this is a good question. Based on the logic outlined here, I would summarize that answer that your focal point needs to prioritize the read of that subject. In the highways of your painting, you can go with large or really expressive brushstrokes as long as you highlight the direction of that brushstroke. And finally, in the pattern sections, all that matters is that you just repeat that pattern as long as you are describing either the texture or the essence of that area. So all of these three parts have different criteria on how you can use those brushstrokes. Once you can internalize this, you don't have to guess what kind of brushstrokes are okay here. All you have to do is to identify which one of these three surfaces you are working with, and then use the tools and techniques suited for that area. Remember to have fun. That's really the only requirement for any of this to actually work. When people can see how excited you are just about the way that you are painting, they will be sucked in and feel that excitement with you. They will be painting together with you in their mind, and that's how you create connection, true connection through your art. Also, painting like that is really fun, and I want you to experience that feeling as well. You probably noticed that all of these paintings contain water. I've been painting water my entire art career, so I compiled everything that I have learned over the years into this one big tutorial so that you can use all of these techniques in your own beautiful waterscapes.